Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up. I finished about 9 things plus a 10th that I didn't talk about last week, so this is going to be a long one. Let's get straight into it. I'm going to start off with the 3 books I finished that are BooktubeSFF Award nominees. The first one is Aquicorn Cove by Katie O'Neill. This is a nominee in the graphic work category and it is a graphic novel for very young readers. It is about a little girl and her father who go to a seaside fishing village to help her aunt and the community rebuild after a bad storm, and while she is there, the girl finds this tiny injured aquicorn in a tidal pool. She takes it home and cares for it, and she learns more about the aquicorns and the underwater community that her aunt knows more about. This is a story, I think, about dealing with loss and grief, but also surprisingly it had a very strong environmental theme, very much about how to have a sustainable way of life that is good for you and the planet. You have to live in balance and harmony with those things and those ecosystems around you. You shouldn't take more than you need because that can injure other people, other ecosystems and such. And I wasn't expecting that sort of theme in a story for children, but I really liked it. I really appreciated it. I probably spent more time looking at the artwork in this than in reading it because it's so short, and I really enjoyed the artwork. It's very simple and cute, and I really liked it. I don't think I enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed The Tea Dragon Society, which is the previous book by O'Neill that I read. I talked about that last week, actually. This was good, but not quite as good, I suppose. I wanted it to be a little bit longer. I wanted some things fleshed out a little bit more. Obviously, it's going to be very short and simple because of the target audience. I probably just expect more because I'm an adult, but it was still very good. Secondly, I listened to the audiobook of Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is nominated in the Best Debut Novel category, and it is young adult fantasy. I was unfortunately really disappointed by this in the end. I'm not going to spend that much time talking about it because it's incredibly hyped. It's been talked about so much. I don't think I even need to summarize it. You probably have heard about it before. So I was okay with this and pretty interested in the world building and the magic up until about the halfway point. The really exciting thing about this book is in its appearances. It has a really exciting veneer. The cast is entirely people of color. It's set in Africa. It's inspired and influenced by Nigerian and African culture. It has an amazing, beautiful cover. It just looks cool and different. Unfortunately, after the 50% point in the audiobook, I started to notice all the things that were driving me slowly crazy. I wasn't getting along with Adeyemi's style. I really disliked a lot of her descriptive choices, especially the way she was describing emotions in what seemed like a really overly dramatic way to me. And I started to notice the cliches, the tropes. Like I said, this has an exciting veneer. Superficially, it looks great and different. But you dig underneath the surface a little bit and you start to uncover all the predictable cliches and tropes. The characters have been done before. This plot has been done before. If you've read any of the really popular young adult fantasy or dystopia series of recent years, you will recognize everything in the storyline and in the character types. And even the world building and the magic system didn't seem that great by the end either. I wish I had liked this more, but I think I was expecting more originality and it just did not deliver on that. It was also far too long for me, and that really heightened how tedious and repetitious the nature of the writing could be. I was ready for this to be over by about the 75% point and it just kept going on. So that was disappointing. And lastly, for BooktubeSFF Award nominees, I read Shah and the End of Time by Roshani Chokshi, which is nominated in the middle grade category. I really enjoyed the Hindu mythology in this. I know very, very little about Hindu mythology, the deities, or the stories, so this was all really new to me and I loved it. However, most of the story was so-so. It's about a young girl named Shah who, she's totally a liar, and she accidentally, but on purpose, lights a magic lamp in her mother's museum and releases the sleeper who threatens to destroy the world and end time. She discovers she is one of the reincarnated Pandava brothers and sets out on a quest with her sister to find magical objects and stop the sleeper before the deadline. This is totally a quest storyline. It's pretty simple and straightforward, and I liked it. It just wasn't amazing other than how much I enjoyed the Hindu mythology aspects. I think part of what dragged it down for me is that I felt like the author was trying way too hard to make it funny constantly. There are jokes and puns and pop culture references on every single page, and it became a little too much for me. I think that if I was a kid, I wouldn't notice that so much, but anyway, it was good. I'll probably read the sequel when it comes out. I think this whole series will be a quartet, and I'm actually pretty interested in finding out about more of the reincarnated Pandava souls and what happens next. Next, I finally finished a bunch of science fiction novels. The first one is Rosewater by Tade Thompson. This is a science fiction story set in Nigeria. It is about an alien that crash lands in London. It's bombed by the British, tunnels underground, and re-emerges in Nigeria outside of Lagos. It's domed, and a community called Rosewater develops around the dome. The main character is a man named Karo. He has basically supernatural abilities because he is sensitive to the xenomorphs or alien biology in the air. He's what's called a sensitive, and he's probably the most powerful sensitive in the world. The story is structured in like 3 different ways. We have a series of chapters that are set in the present day in 2066, and it's Karo discovering that other sensitives are dying, and he's investigating that and wondering if it's going to happen to him. The other set of chapters is like a chronological sequence of events, like flashbacks showing you Karo's history, how he discovered that he was a sensitive, how he's worked with like the secretive branch of the government called Sector or Section 45, and his long history with the alien and the Rosewater community. And then there are another set of chapters which are interludes. They're kind of random. It's less important when they happen and more what happens in them, these specific things that like happens to Karo that he finds out. I really enjoyed the premise of this book. The alien is truly alien, and piecing together all the things that have happened and Karo's history with the alien wormwood is really interesting. I also thought that this was a great way to do basically supernatural abilities or ESP in a science fiction novel. It looks like something magic, but there's an actual explanation for it, and I really liked that. The only thing about this book that I didn't like was Karo. I did not like him at all. I thought he was basically a dick and kind of sexist. And I never really sympathized with him. I spent most of the book thinking that I was going to finally discover something about him and his history that made me sympathize with him, but no, basically he's a pretty unlikable guy. And the only redeeming quality that he probably has, in my opinion, is that he does fall in love with a woman and attempts to do some things because of that relationship. But on the whole, he's not a super likable person. Despite that, despite not liking Karo pretty much at all, I still found the story so fascinating, especially the end, and I really want to know what's going to happen next, so I'll definitely be reading the sequel, which is called The Rosewater Insurrection. Next, I read 2 books in the Company Wars series by C.J. Cherryh. The first one is Rimrunners, and this is set after the events of Down Below Station when the Union has lost the war against the Merchanters Alliance. The main character is Elizabeth Yeager, and Yeager was on a Union ship, but she was left behind on Pell because she was dockside when the Union ships abandoned Pell. So she has survived in Alliance territory for a couple of years. When the book begins, she is on Thule Station. She's hiding that she was from a Union ship, and she's basically starving to death because she refuses to take work on the station or anywhere else. She only wants to take work on a spaceship, and that's not happening. So she's literally starving to death and barely able to stand up and take care of herself in the beginning scenes of this. In the course of events, she ends up killing 2 men on the space station, basically in self-defense, and she narrowly escapes being arrested by the station officials when she gets a job on an Alliance spook ship called the Loki. Then she jumps immediately into the problems happening on the Loki. There are these weird power play things going on with the crew and the officers, and Jaeger immediately befriends the one guy on the ship that nobody likes. His name is NG, and he is obviously extremely traumatized. He has PTSD or something. Jaeger, however, decides that she likes him because she immediately has sex with him when she first meets him, and she thinks he's kind of sweet during sex. Literally, she thinks he's sweet because he has manic, frantic sex with her and then does it again for her to orgasm. And this is the point at which things start getting weird for me. Jaeger has a really casual attitude towards sex, and she basically uses sex as currency. One of the men that she kills on the space station, she kills in self-defense because she has sex with him in exchange for food and shelter, and he basically starts abusing her, and she needs to get out of this situation. Then when she's on the Loki, she kind of uses sex to cement relationships, to calm situations down. And did I mention she kind of has a low bar for what's good in a sexual relationship? I couldn't shake this feeling that she was incredibly passive in all of the sex scenes, basically. Things were just happening to her and she wasn't really enjoying it. She was just doing it because it was a means to an end. Maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but it did not sit well with me, and there's a really fine line sometimes between what seems consensual and what seems to be forced or abusive in this. I didn't like that so much. This was mainly interesting as a psychological story, which I think is what I've said about many of CJ Cherryh's Company Wars books at this point. It's really, I think, about how people behave under pressure when they are locked together in a claustrophobic spaceship for years at a time. What do you do when you cannot get away from people, when you cannot get away from your friends or your enemies or officers who are abusive? It's incredibly difficult. There's a lot of tension, but it felt kind of repetitive and boring in the middle, and all of the really exciting stuff happened at the very end. And I just didn't like Jaeger that much, or how sex was used in the story, so it was a little bit disappointing, but it wasn't a bad book. The other book that I read in the Company Wars series is Heavy Time. This is set some years before the war between the Alliance and the Union begins, and it follows 2 men, Ben and Bird, who work on a salvage ship for a large corporation. They rescue a man named Decker from a destroyed ship that they want to claim as salvage. What actually happened to the ship is the big mystery of the story. Decker survived for over 2 months in a dead ship, basically, and he is incredibly traumatized and confused and fragile. His partner, a woman named Corey, died in the accident, and he's just so messed up. And when he is rescued, Ben and Bird have really different approaches to dealing with him. Bird wants to care for him. He understands that Decker is seriously damaged, and he tries to be more gentle with him and caring. But Ben, the younger man in the partnership, all he cares about is the money. He does not care about Decker. He's incredibly irritated at Decker's condition and how he behaves, and he basically wants to do away with Decker so that it eases the way towards claiming his ship as salvage, which is a huge financial break for Ben and Bird. Bird is pretty appalled at Ben's opinion. He's just appalled that Ben has no real feeling for a fellow human being in need. And I think that is a major theme of the story. How much do you owe other people humanitarian aid? How much can you afford to be altruistic? Do you even think about other people that way? Clearly Bird does and Ben does not. And Ben was raised from childhood by the corporation that he works for. And in this universe, when corporations raise and train and educate and practically mind control their own workers, that's not good. So the big questions are, what is going to happen to Decker? What actually happened to his ship? And what is the corporation trying to cover up? I really liked this story in a way that I haven't gotten along so well with some of the others in the series. I think it's because I actually found Decker and Bird to be good people, very sympathetic, and Ben was a really good addition to the story who added some tension, but is also a pretty fleshed out person. You kind of understand where he's coming from as well. It was just really satisfying, especially the last couple of chapters when everything just explodes and all the action happens and there are some really high stakes. So I'm currently reading the direct sequel to this, which is called Hellburner. I think it's pretty unusual because most of the books in this universe, in this series, are kind of standalones and you can read them in any order that you want to, but Heavy Time and Hellburner are kind of unusual in being directly linked. And Hellburner is continuing the story of Ben and Decker. So I'm really curious what's going to happen next for these people, especially because I might be warming up a little bit to Ben. I don't think I super like him, but he's definitely a really interesting character. The final science fiction novel that I finished this week was Hard to be a God by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, translated by Olga Bormashenko. This is probably the second most famous novel that the Strugatsky brothers wrote, right behind Roadside Picnic, I think. And I really was interested in the topic of this one. It is about a man named Anton. He is an undercover agent from Earth on another planet in a civilization that's kind of stuck in a medieval period, and he is witnessing the rise of a tyrant and like the beginnings of communism, fascism, nationalism. He's trying to save people from these ideological political purges where scientists, intellectuals, artists, book lovers are being targeted, rounded up, arrested, and killed. And he's specifically trying to save a couple of the really famous scientists and artists and healers that he knows. And in his undercover identity as Don Rumata, he's going head to head with the rising tyrant Don Reba. I felt like a lot of this was kind of parody and commentary on what the Strugatsky brothers were probably actually living through and witnessing in 1950s and 1960s in the Soviet Union. And that was the really interesting thing, especially about how Anton feels. He sees these signs, he knows what's happening because he knows Earth's history, he knows what's happened in human history, so it's all very clear, but can he do anything about it? Can one person do anything about this? And is he even allowed to? Because essentially he's not supposed to interfere. And I get the feeling that his fellow undercover agents don't necessarily agree with him or what he's doing in this situation either. It feels fruitless in some ways. You can try so hard and still not make any headway in a situation like this. I just really liked the story. It felt not very strong on plot, which is what I would call most of the books I've read by the Strugatskys so far. They often feel more like a series of short stories or vignettes tied together, and sometimes I want a little bit more of a clearly defined plot, but in this case, the idea, the situation was so interesting, I wasn't really thinking about that. After that, I blazed my way through the first two books in the Magpie series by KJ Charles. I can't remember the name of the series actually. These books are The Magpie Lord and A Case of Possession. And it's kind of fantasy mashed up with smutty historical male-male romance. I read these books mainly as fantasy because the plots are basically magical mysteries, and I was really into that. This is about two men, Crane, a British aristocrat who's been living in Shanghai for about 20 years. He's made his fortune as a smuggler and a trader. He has to come back to England to deal with his family estate situation when his father and brother die, leaving him the estate and the title. He gets cursed, and Stephen Day, a justiciar, a magic practitioner who's kind of like the magic police, arrives to break the curse and figure out what is happening in Crane's home and with his family. They become lovers. So I really liked the plots, I liked the magic system, I liked the mysteries and the investigations. a lot. I liked the characters, both Crane and Steven are really interesting people and I liked them, but I was not really into the romance side of this, probably because the sexual dynamic between Crane and Steven is basically dominant submissive. It's completely consensual, but they're basically pretty rough when it comes to sex, and it's not my thing at all. Like, I don't have a problem with it in general because it's completely consensual. It's just not what I'm looking for in romance storylines. So I plan on finishing the series. I've got one more book to read, but I'm really reading them more as fantasy than as romance. And lastly, probably my favorite read of the entire week was Finding My Elegy by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is one of her later poetry collections. The first half is selected poems from all of her previous collections, and then the second half are the newer poems from 2006 to 2010, I believe. And I loved everything about this. I got a couple of poems into it and knew immediately I was going to love it, and I needed to own my own copy. I was reading an interlibrary loan that I didn't have for very long, and I couldn't write in it, I couldn't put sticky notes in it. I just wanted to keep rereading it and come back to my favorite poems. I don't really know how to talk about poetry, and I'm not very good yet at figuring out, like, explaining what it is about a poem that really works for me, or what it is about a poet's style that I'm particularly drawn to. Whatever it is though, Le Guin has it, and I can tell that I love it because I am immediately rereading it. Like, I would read a poem 2, 3, 4 times before I would move on to the next one. And I think wanting to reread poetry is a good sign that you're really into it. I don't know. I just loved everything about this, and it's like shot to the top of my to buy list when I'm allowed to buy books again. And that is it for everything that I finished reading this past week. I feel like I've been here talking for ages because it's been really hard to put my thoughts in order this morning, but hopefully some of this made sense to you guys. Let me know if you have read any of these books, or if you want to, leave me some comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again very soon, and until then, bye.